Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show. I've got Marco and Richard and John with me today. How's it going, guys?
Very good, thank you. Good, thanks. Yeah.
Very good. Have a bit of depressing news to talk about, although I think almost always the news we're talking about is depressing, given that we're focusing on the war. And that is something which I think people must have seen in the headlines, but is probably in the history of the war going to be regarded as, I would think, a major point of escalation. And this was a strike by a drone against American soldiers. This killed three American soldiers and then wounded a number more. The actual number of wounded seemed to vary according to which news source I read. I don't know if we exactly know. Some said about, I think about 27, some said 34, but it's in that region. And so even though this wasn't a strike directly in Israel, it would something which is very much entered the language and the conversation around the war in recent weeks is the nature of Iranian proxies. And so something that we saw in the strike was that the US or that Iran was faulted. Iran's denied responsibility for this, but it was faulted because it was done by one of their proxies. So that's the context of what we're talking about. John, Marco, Richard, what was your first impressions on when you were reading about this story?
Well, I was pretty disgusted. Unfortunately, I was thinking this day would come eventually, and it's just all around such a horrible situation. And I think from from how it was allowed to happen, standing back for so many months now, basically saying we aren't going to do anything until you kill a couple of U.S. soldiers. And now it's happened, and Biden's response is we'll hold all those people to account, all those responsible to account at a time and in a manner of our choosing. Is this comment supposed to head off criticism for when he takes too long to hold them accountable? It's already too late for that. They already took American hostages. They've been attacking us. They've been funding the people that are killing Israelis. How many things do they have to do to instigate a war with us before we're actually going to do something? Uh, the one person, Wesley Clark, a retired general who was once NATO Supreme Commander in Europe, said something really good. He said, the US should stop saying we don't want to escalate. This invites them to attack us. Stop calling our strikes retaliation. He's exactly right. The way this is worded has to be changed. Telling them we're not going to attack you is inviting them to attack us. It just seems so simple to me.
Yeah, and so I guess I didn't look at American news sources before this, and actually maybe I should. So, John, is there, I don't know, is there an atmosphere of outrage in the country at the moment? Do you get that impression?
I don't know, like I listen to NBC every morning just to stay up with that side. And they have actually talked about it, but it felt like it was in passing and then immediately to move on to another issue about Israel or something like that. So while I was surprised they did talk about it and even gave some more details like how many people were involved and um the they mentioned the response by I can't remember who it was that responded. He's from the joy of cats. Um, yeah, I can't find. Oh, here it is. The groups in the yeah, the Iranian guy, Kanini.
Yes.
Uh, the groups in the region do not take orders from Iran, and war is not a solution. An immediate ceasefire in Gaza can lead to the return of peace. So they talked about all that more than they actually talked about what the UNRWA teachers actually did that day, or you know, uh, what UNRWA is going to do about it, if anything, if they're not defunded and so on. So yeah, they're definitely still trying to spin it against Israel, but at the same time, they can't deny this one. It's pretty glaringly terrible event.
Sure. Mark and Richard, what was your impression?
Yeah, as John said, it's a very very sad outcome. This one, after 9/11, there was a phrase that security expert used to use, like Islamic terrorists have to be lucky once. We have to be lucky all the time in order to prevent attacks on us, and that's exactly what happened. It was probably just a fluke. This particular drone, the circumstances were such that they were allowed to cause a significant damage and kill and injure lots of people. But more broadly, we are at a sort of junction in history where the West is facing the choice to either give up its own values or pursue and stand up for what it believes. And unfortunately, politicians, because there are lots of elections right now or coming up soon, are literally selling selling us up the river. And if you know the meaning of the expression, you can work out the grim outcome of what's going to come our way. To use the word of a Democrat congressman, Seth Moulton, a former soldier, served in Iraq. So hat off to him. However, he says something like, "Deterrence hard, war is worse." Well, then what do we do? Shall we give up and give in to the first bullies? Shall we give up to bullies nowadays? That's the direction we're going. It's fine, but freedom and civilizations are not things that we should jettison as soon as some uncivilized baboon growl at you, or as soon as there is, I don't know, things like a flu going around, so we lock down the universe. That's non-negotiable. Freedom and civilization is one of the main values of the civilized world. So we cannot afford to treat them like trading commodities. If you go down the route, you effectively continues the perpetual cycle of attacks, appeasement, the death of young soldiers, and we start all over again, like we've done for the last, probably since the Second War, really, or certainly since the end of probably after the 80s, in the last 30, 40 years. And what we are facing, effectively, we seem to be scared of standing up to a bunch of camel herders whose only purpose is to make the whole world point their ass to the sky 5 times a day to worship a made-up ghost. They want us to be slaves. They're not trying to uphold civilization, make the world a better place. They are trying to make us slaves. And that's why the choice is civilization or Middle Ages.
Yeah. I think that for a bit of context in relation to the drone attack, there's been like almost 200 drone attacks on US outposts in the Middle East. And this is the first one that has been successful on the enemy's side of the equation. But it was an inevitable consequence of where we've been heading. And it is obviously what the US has been unfortunately waiting for in the meantime. I mean, in the way in which the various papers describe it, there was as usual, we were given The Guardian as one of the sources of information. And in The Guardian, for example, they question whether this was a random opportunistic drone that happened to be successful. Whether was it clear that Iran wasn't actually trying to escalate, but it happened to get lucky. They only got lucky because they're trying to attack US troops. I mean, the way of phrasing that is utterly ridiculous. You're really trying to drain the enemy of its intent when it clearly does have intent. I think all of the concepts that are involved in all of this that I've been looking at are just not clearly identified and not clearly understood. Words like what a deterrent really means, what retaliatory is, the fact that you're always reactive, you're not preemptive and laying out your principles and your red lines and sticking to them and making sure you can enforce them in advance. You don't even have to lay out a red line. You can enforce your principle in advance of that. And the words that are missing, words like victory or defeat of the enemy or surrender of the enemy, it's always capitulation, or let's have dinner with the enemy, or let's have lunch with the enemy, or let's talk over a drink, or let's see where we can come to some agreement, a gentleman's agreement. That strikes me as deeply depressing. And I think the other term that I notice endlessly used is escalation. And it's escalation that always sits there floating in a vacuum. It's by whom? Under what circumstances? It's as if the US and the UK are spoken about as imperialists, and they're fighting against the passive tense of escalation. And that just goes to show how much the reporting of this and the attitudes towards this erase the enemy from existence and make the US and the UK and the Western countries with their values the real enemy, simply by the omission of what they're fighting against and the excuses that they offer by watering down the other side.
Yes, and I guess maybe just to explain it a bit more for people who haven't read too much about the story. So the way in which the drone was able to kind of slip through, as it's been reported, is that a friendly American drone was coming back into the base, and that when that's happening, the base has a kind of auto response kind of feature, I guess you'd say, to shoot down incoming drones. But when a friendly drone is coming in, they turn it off. And it's at that time that this hostile drone came in and was able to make it strike. So whether knowingly or not, whether they knew they were able to do that or not, they basically got through a flaw in the system. Now, maybe we should expect mistakes like that to happen in war, but at the same time, as with so many things in this, I wanted to see more language of responsibility coming from the government about this, either that they themselves were responsible or that they were going to be making sure this could never happen again. They were going to be changing their procedures about when drones are coming back in, because that's basically a weak spot that, since it's so well advertised now, will continue to be exploited if it remains. And I also noticed the language about escalation. And this is something that's troubling. I think that it's taken as just received wisdom that escalation is a bad thing. Now, obviously, it's not like we should be hungering for war at all times and saber wrestling, right? But the situation we seem to be in now, it's a bit reminiscent, I think, of the attitudes that people held between the First and Second World War. People were so appalled by what happened in the First World War that they basically didn't want to do anything to escalate the situation with Germany or with any of these other states. And therefore, they ended up appeasing them. And then, of course, actually then in the long term, what ends up happening is you end up in a wider conflict. So then if people hadn't been worried about escalating against Germany when they reoccupied the Rhineland, or they took bits of Czechoslovakia, whatever, then they could have avoided much worse conflict in the future. And people seem to be in the same situation. They would do anything to avoid escalating this particular conflict. And I think history bears out that all we're actually ending up doing is we're going to store up that conflict for the future. And in terms of the American response, I agree that it's depressing. Something that I think the reason why it's depressing is because clearly the American government holds American lives cheap. And that's the real revelation. And not even the revelation, I think we've known that for a while, really. But when a foreign power kills your citizens, I think surely the only appropriate response from a government has to be very, very strong. Now, the people who might oppose something like that, I think often would kind of clothe themselves in the language of pragmatism, that we have to be practical about this. Yes, we have to do something about it. But basically what it amounts to is they're not going to take any serious action about it at all. And I think that's the kind of reasoning that has got us to this situation in the first place. Rand, of course, spoke about the Iranian embassy crisis back in, I think, was that 79 to 1981, that was decades ago, and said that if the American government doesn't respond very decisively to this now, then we're going to be storing up problems for ourselves for decades in the future. And lo and behold, she's been proven correct. And the fact that Jimmy Carter isn't a more reviled president in American history is a symptom of the problem, really, because people haven't identified that how much that the Iranian embassy crisis is a source for a lot of these problems. So in terms of how people think about this, I think we really need to see a big sea change in that appeasement can't be viewed as practical anymore. And we need to call it appeasement, because it is, in so many people's minds, obvious that appeasement is wrong. And yet we don't call this kind of thing the lack of response, or just the lack of response from the American government, or just the signaling that they will give a response, but they never actually back it up with action. We need to call that appeasement. And given that there's a lot of cultural purchase on the idea that that appeasement is wrong, because everyone likes to imagine that in the 1930s they wouldn't have appeased Hitler. I think that's the number one way we can probably make progress on this. But I mean, so Marco and Richard, so you mentioned reading The Guardian. Was there anything else in the media response to this that struck you? Because I guess I was struck by how immediately defeatist they were. They would rather do anything except contemplate that actually the killing of American citizens would naturally bring the American military into a state of war.
Yeah.
Was there anything that struck you guys?
Yeah. By the way, every time you make me read the Guardian, you genocide my neurons. So I start reading the article. By the end of it, my IQ is down a few points, and don't start from a very high basis. So, but yeah, the response of the papers here in Britain, the Guardian was one. We actually read a few articles about it. So one article's response was, "Well, we don't really know what we should do. You could do that. You could do the other. Who knows?" And the other one was, the Middle East is a big bomb. We're scared it might blow up, but it's all Israel's fault for starting the bombing of Gaza. That's typical lefty response. By the way, people who write for the Guardian, people like Owen Jones, we know perfectly well what they think. But what's even worse is the conservative. What should be the conservative paper in Britain, the Telegraph? It says something like, "Oh, again, we don't know what to do. This is the option. The other option, one option is doing nothing. The other one is ramp up, but well, we don't really know what to do. We're just empty." And the BBC, of course, comes up with something like, "Oh, the region has become more dangerous," implying since October 7th, since Israel's retaliatory self-defense. And that gives you a sense of what the great geniuses out there, the great minds out there are thinking about this. And that's why we end up the way we are.
I think it's important to say about The Guardian, particularly when we end up poking it so often, that it isn't peripheral. It's not on the far left. It's on the centre left, which is really the centre in the UK predominantly, since a lot of it seems to be echoed by even conservative politicians in terms of its outlook, as we'll discuss shortly. It certainly represents the body of continental European opinion when it comes to geopolitics, and it's equivalent to like the New York Times probably in terms of editorial policies, as far as I can see. It's not a little corner publication that we're poking just because it's an extreme example of stupidity. It's right there in the center. And I think one of the things that I think was particularly shocking is in talking, these articles were talking about the broader region, and they were talking quite a bit about Iraq as well as Iran. And Iraq containing US military bases, for example, that the Iraqis would really like the US to withdraw from. And of course, Iraq commenting on the wider conflict that's going on, and the criticism of Iran as being behind some of these attacks, including the attack in Jordan on this drone attack. So here's a couple of quotes as examples, and I guess this is a rhetorical question, since you guys have read the same articles, but maybe people in the chat might want to try this. But tell me if these quotes are written by The Guardian or by the Iraqi officials, and see if you can tell the difference. So here's the first one. So is this The Guardian or the Iraqis? "We want to see an end to the cycle of violence in the Middle East, to establish fundamental rules to prevent further repercussions and curb escalations." Okay, that's the first one. And here's the second one. "The appalling 7th of October horror and Israel's repulsive US-backed response have afforded an unmissable opportunity to advance our objectives," or to advance the objectives. This is the objectives of getting US military out of Iran. In case you thought it was the other way around, the first quote is from the Iraqis, the one talking about ending the cycle of violence, and the second quote talking about the repulsive US-backed response of Israel is from The Guardian. Now, this is not a cheap crack at The Guardian. This is a big point. Because if your own side is so capitulating to the enemy's position that it's such a commonly heard and read opinion, then how are you ever going to succeed when confronting the real enemy? You are conceding to the evil of the other side with your constant comments that denigrate your own values, that reject the notion of values, Western values, in favor of pragmatism, capitulation, not rocking the boat, or indeed calling your own side evil overtly. I think that's quite disgusting.
John, any thoughts on the media response or on anything else?
Yeah, I read that Guardian article too, and it was thoroughly disgusting, cowardly, dishonest in every way. There were many lines like that, but I remember that one. Yeah, the overall view, whether it was the conservatives or the Guardian, it was very weak. People want to pretend we're not already in a war, and I just think it's stupid. I don't know what else to say.
Sure. I also picked up on the quote you mentioned earlier, John, by Nasser Kamani, who, for people who have never heard of this guy before, understandably, is the Iranian Foreign Office spokesperson. And you already read it out, John, but yeah, he says that basically Iran is not responsible because they don't dictate orders to the resistance groups in what they do or in how they defend their own countries, right? Which was an amazing thing to say, because whilst it is on the surface of things denying Iranian involvement, it's basically saying, look, the groups we fund, we don't tell them exactly what to do. They just do it of their own accord. So it's actually an admission that Iran is behind this. They may not have dictated that this particular group, which I've got the name here somewhere, but it's not before me. It was the Islamic something resistance. They might not have dictated for them to take this particular strike. But of course, Iran is in favor of them taking this general kind of action and is enabling them and funding them, giving them weapons in order to do this. So Iran isn't even really giving a cursory denial of this. There was some criticism, as you mentioned, Richard, from the Iraqi government of this. And I suspect that's basically because they're worried about this escalating and leading to conflict in their country. And maybe we didn't say, for people, again, who haven't read about this, the particular base that was struck is at a three-way border between Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. So it's in a kind of unusual position. And is kind of reckless in that, for people who don't want escalation, the reason why this is reckless is because it had the potential then to bring in a lot of these countries as well. So how do we get across to people that we can't keep appeasing? Because this should be the thing that is so obvious. Like I said, everyone imagines that if they were in the 1930s, they would recognize the threat that Hitler was and that we can't appease. And Neville Chamberlain is basically viewed as, a tremendous villain, and rightly so, for his policy of appeasement. And yet what's so perplexing then is that every day our own governments seem to be doing exactly the same kind of thing. Now, they might not be making concessions in the sense that Chamberlain was making to Hitler, in that they were approving of Germany taking this land. But they aren't taking firm military responses. Now, they've done some cursory strikes against the Houthis. Now, it's good. They should be doing that. But I really think that we need to see much more whole-scale action. And it's shocking to me that people aren't more motivated. People will take to the streets every week to protest in favor of Gazans and of all kinds of other issues. And yet people aren't taking to the streets saying, oh my God, what are we storing up for ourselves? So how do we kind of wake people up? Mark or Richard, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it's partially the same old story. It's the hate for the successful, the hate for what's civilized, the hate for what represents the good, effectively. You have people who are faced with a choice. Shall I support America? Shall I support Israel? And by doing that, shall I support progress, human knowledge, civilization? Or shall I support this guy that looks like, oh, he's a bit battered, it's not very powerful, it's not very rich. And they go down the route, again, because of the premise of altruism. However, our leaders, including Biden, they're not facing Hitler, they're not Chamberlain, they're not in a situation 100 years ago. They've seen history, they've seen the mistakes since then, and they still choose to go down the same route. I can understand President Biden is senile and probably doesn't even know which way is up. So you can forgive him for not knowing what he's doing. But what's the excuse for our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak? What is just a dum-dum. Why can't these people see what the consequences of not taking a clear line, not taking actions mean? We've seen it over and over again. As Morgan said, the Iranian embassy business, it could have been a straightforward send the Navy SEALs, SAS in, get the hostages out and bomb the hell out of the buggers. No, they chose to deal with them. Even recently, the US gave military intelligence to Iran, to Tehran, the theocratic dictatorship, that there was an attack planned against them. So what are you playing at? If you find out there is an attack against the state of Tehran, you should actually give money to the people who are doing it.
Well, not in that case. That was the Islamic State.
I know, but sure. You should work against these people, not with them. You can't keep making the same mistakes like they made with Afghanistan. Just look at disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2020. And that was under Biden's. And that's why they're paralyzed. They are afraid of taking a position. A, because intellectually they don't know where they stand. And B, because politically they're more worried about getting votes now that they can't print out ballots. They're probably worried about the next election rather than being worried about, if you go down this route, there's not going to be need for an election because we're all going to be slaves.
Yeah. I think when it comes to your point, Morgan, about why people recognize what Chamberlain did wrong and why they can't apply it to now, I think they only recognize what Chamberlain did wrong in appeasing because they've checked out the answers of what happened since. And they know what happened from 1939 onwards. But they don't treat the principles as being the lesson there. They don't treat the philosophy of each person involved, each country involved, as being what's relevant. They just see that this particular set of circumstances led to this, and therefore the right thing to do was not what Chamberlain did. But they can't then, if you don't identify the principles that appeasement to bullies is wrong, in the same way that appeasement to bullies in the playground at school is wrong, and that giving a bully your lunch money one day will not make him not come for your lunch money the next day. It will ensure he comes for your lunch money every day. And anybody else inclined to bully will do the same. So I think that's the essence of the problem there, is that people really don't, even when analysing the history of the past, they don't think of it outside of a set of circumstances, a set of 10,000 different reasons where X or Y happened, and then not be able to apply it to the situation of now, where the future is as yet unwritten, even if the direction of travel can be predicted based on current thinking, current actions, and therefore they can't make the right decisions now. And that I do find particularly frustrating. That's where books like The Ominous Parallels by Leonard Peikoff, that get under the skin of the philosophy going on in the run-up to Hitler coming to power, are the really help you understand the principles and philosophies involved.
Yeah, The Ominous Parallels is one of those ones that's always on my list to buy. And then whenever I go to buy it, I always want to get one of the original copies, not one of the more recent reprints, but then they're really expensive, so I never end up getting it. So I'm entirely in need of reading The Ominous Parallels, and so is everyone else probably. But I do want to give that a read.
Sorry to interrupt you. If you're an ARCUK member, you can actually watch the book club, effectively the lessons. Every chapter we analyze it with James Valiant with a philosophic point of view, and every single chapter of the Ominous Parallel. So if you're a member, you can actually access it, and
yeah,
the world will never be the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should probably check those out as well. There's a lot of our own content I've still not consumed as well. But that actually it leads on to my next question quite nicely, because what I wanted to focus on, because I think this would be of benefit to people, is what kind of unique perspective on this can we provide as objectivists that would be useful to people? Because I mean, I have some things in mind, but I want to hear what you guys kind of think about that. So John, like, what do you think people can get from an objectivist perspective on this that they're not going to get elsewhere, if that makes sense?
Probably most fundamentally the focus on ideas, that it's the ideas and the philosophies and values that drive all this stuff. It's not the circumstances and the accidents, and that's how you can break people, hopefully some people, from the concrete bound, like, well, we're not dealing with Hitler, so maybe it can be appeased, kind of stupid reasoning. Because it really is the ideas that drive this. When you look at the charter, the Hamas charter, I mean, it's pretty clear there what they want. And they wanted it for a long time, and how that is just not even brought up as evidence for anything right now is part of why I think we need objectivism.
Mark and Richard?
And I would add to that, I totally agree with you there, John. I think some of the key lessons in objectivism are things like evasion. It never works. Won't work in your personal life. Won't work on the geopolitical stage. Reality will kick back and will teach you a good whoop-ass lesson sooner or later. And that's a key point there. I think that actions have consequences, cause and effect. People trying to divorce what happens from what caused it in the first place, or wishing that something could be different without putting in place the causes that will make it different, attempting to just wish an alternative reality as some perfect utopia that we could have instead, where everybody got along but still was religious and still held to their completely different sets of principles and ideals that are in utter conflict with each other and in conflict with life itself. All of that, it becomes impossible to go along with if you've got the principles of objectivism under your belt, or you've read any of Ayn Rand's essays, which allow you to understand what's going on.
And the principles are just a set of ideas which dictate your actions. Your actions are defined by what you think. And if you understand why a certain principle has got a connection with reality, with the real world, then you'll be able to apply your knowledge to whichever circumstance you will encounter, because your knowledge will be based on sound principle, based on reality. And that's why when people say that objectivist principles don't make sense when translating reality, they don't understand what they're talking about, because the very fact that you have a principle, it means that it has got to be linked to reality. We haven't got this dichotomy between practical and theoretical. If it works in theory, it's because it must work in practice. If it works in practice, it has a conceptualization. So, if you understand what you're talking about, you'll be able to get around and understand what things around you are and why they behave the way they behave.
Yes, I think I basically agree with all of what all three of you said, and it coalesces around, I guess, at least what's missing is principled thinking, and that's something that people would get from objectivism. And I guess it's always more shocking to me that people are unprincipled in how they think about foreign policy, perhaps because in the realm of foreign policy, the consequences of not doing it are so much more dire. There are devastating consequences on domestic policy as well. But in the realm of foreign policy, we're talking about wars, people dying, people, being blown up and so on. So in a sense, it should bring home to people the real reality and the consequences of not thinking in principle. And as you say, because people can't, people seem to not be able to make the comparison and gain the principled understanding of why it was wrong for Neville Chamberlain to appease Hitler and to not stand up to him, and why that enabled him to continue further. Since people can't make the connection between that and the US or the UK or whoever not standing up to countries like Iran nowadays, that is something that really perpetuates the conflict. And I think also, perhaps as a derivative of that, what we need to see people being is much more proactive in what they want their governments to be doing regarding foreign policy. I think we're far too reactive. And so this was just in the Daily Objective beforehand. Daniel and I were talking about an interview that Douglas Murray did with Benjamin Netanyahu. And what I thought was good about Netanyahu in that was he was speaking about being proactive in combating Iran and their proxies, which is, the case here. It was one of their proxy kind of people that they fund. Whereas I think the public reaction is that if a Western country were to be proactive in attacking Iran or attacking one of these proxies, rather than waiting for them to attack first, I think that the civilian population would be very shocked by that and would view their government as being warmongers, rather than recognizing, kind of as John was saying, that we have in effect been in an undeclared war with all of these groups for decades now, and we need to do something about it. Just because there isn't something in the immediate moment that they've done, it doesn't mean that they aren't using force at us whenever they can all the time, and we just happen to let it go. So I think that's something that's important as well.
And that honesty about calling out what reality is just the starting point. Is even before you start to identify, imply your principles, you've got to be able to recognize what the situation is right now. I mean, I think some of the responses from the leaders, Sunak, for example, he urged Iran, quote, to continue to de-escalate tensions in the region. What do you mean to continue to de-escalate tensions? They've just murdered 3 US soldiers, for goodness sake. How are they currently de-escalating tensions? By stating the absolute opposite. That's talking about what you wish it to be like. And again, in the Guardian article, they were talking about how far we should go to restore deterrence. And again, there hasn't been a deterrence. The deterrence hasn't existed because it hasn't been convincing enough. And if you apply deterrent properly, then you teach everybody across the world, whether it's Russia or China, frequently used as people that we should be concerned about, separate to the conflict we're dealing with at the moment. But you talk to them all when you actually enforce a deterrent.
Yes. And actually, that's something that leads on to our secondary topic quite well. But just before we do that, I think as well, maybe something, and this has just occurred to me, but that people would benefit from is objectivism's perspective on the nature of force. Because far too often you see people acting as if you could reason with these countries or reason with some of these groups. But since they've opted to use force, that is the point at which reasoning stops. And that's something which objectivism is very clear on and stresses very much. And that's a point which seems to be lost on people, at least on some people. Some people who aren't objectivists seem to, I think, basically understand that. So maybe it's not a unique point in objectivism, but it's something which, if you were to study Rand's view on this, I think it would clarify issues much more, and it would point to the essential failing in a policy of appeasement, or why you can't just let it go for fear of the consequences.
And again, it's not because it's Rand's point of view. It's because it's the right thing. If you understand what right and wrong is, it's the right thing to do, to be on the side of civilization. These guys are not, all the Islamic nutters are not fighting to make the world a better place, are not fighting for freedom. They're fighting for enslavement on a basis of religion. And that's as far away you can go from the principles of freedom for the individual that you should have. The individual rights are derived from the nature of man, and these guys are trying to go as far away from that as they can, and that's why they have to be fought with every strength. And if you understand why life is the ultimate value for objectivism, it's because you can only live a free life. If you have to live like a slave, you might well die now. So it's not about surviving at any cost. If I have to live like a slave, I'd much rather die right now.
And I guess, actually, I was about to read the super chats, but maybe, do you guys have any essay recommendations for people that they should check out for Rand that might be useful in thinking about this? I have a couple in mind, but do you guys have any?
Definitely Faith and Force. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would certainly recommend that one. Yeah. And how faith always leads to force. That's the crucial element of that. So faith, whether it's religion or whether it's faith instead of reason, will always lead to force. And people think faith is a good thing. It's beautiful to have belief. No, it's not. it will always lead to a force against one person against another, the violation of their freedoms. So that's a crucial essay.
John, any off the top of your head?
Well, I just think that one other thing that objectivism can bring is a clarity in these issues like you're talking about, and possibly the nature of government would be one that people should read, because I think a lot of this confusion in dealing with the Palestinian death cult comes from the public's vast misunderstanding of what government is. And that comes down to, like Marco and Richard were saying, the idea of force and the initiation of it. But people see their governments not as protectors of rights, but as nannies for themselves, or as police for the world. I think one of the reasons you see all this de-escalation talk, or people go along with it so willingly, is that it's a similar issue that's going on with the police in America. The police are seen as their role should be to de-escalate a situation. And they're there to kind of neutralize things. That's not what a military does. We're not talking about something happening within a civilized area, but war is a break of civilization, like we've been trying to say on the channel for a while now. So people want to see this, the military action, to be like a police, like the police would act. And it just brings me back to the fact that they're confused about what government is and what it should do.
I think also a useful one for people would be The Roots of War. That's, of course, wholly dedicated to the nature of war. That would be a useful one. But that also gets at some of the, has a commonality with the essay you recommended, Marco, Faith versus Force. So that one would be good. And then maybe this might be a bit of a wild card option, but I think For the New Intellectuals pretty good as well. When she's talking about the Attila and the Witch Doctor, which gets at the nature in which ideas are used to reinforce this. That might be useful as well. But okay, so just before we move on to the second topic, we'll do the super chat. So we have $5 from Robert Naser, who says, kudos, John, Marco, Richard, and Morgan. Thank you for your rational approach, for your insights, and for keeping the conversation going. It's awfully sweet of you, Robert. You can't see it, but I'm blushing underneath my beard. I've got £3 from Kathleen. Thank you, Kathleen. Oh, and then £2 as well from Kathleen, saying, these episodes are so good. Thank you, guys. It's very sweet of you, Kathleen. Thank you so much. So let's move on to our next topic then, which is a story which was actually buried in the headlines today, but since it also pertained to Iran, but it wasn't the kind of major Iran story that was in the news. And this is the announcement of further sanctions by the UK government against Iran, but not for the strike that we've just seen happening. It was due to a plot which was basically unveiled, I think, by ITV, that Iran had been plotting to assassinate 2 journalists on British soil. So let's talk about this a bit. Marco and Richard, since you guys are also here in the UK, what did you make of this?
Yeah, I was so pleased when Pluto was demoted from planet to planetoid, because it was a Mickey Mouse planet, and Earth is becoming a joke as well. It's like somebody is trying to commit a murder in your own country, and all you do is send a letter telling them, oh, you've been very bad. From now on, we're not going to allow you to, I don't know, to keep your bank account or to come back again. It's like it's history repeating itself over and over and over again. In 2017, 2 Russian spies murdered a guy using a nerve agent, Novichok, here in Britain. In the process, an innocent bystander died because he touched the stuff. It's so poisonous that it persists forever. And somebody else nearly died. And the police officer who attended the crime scene initially, his life was fatally ruined. And now we have 2 journalists from a Iranian station, a news station, who have been threatened by effectively being killed by Iran spies. And all we do, our response, is to sanction the possible 2 people that were in charge of attacking or do whatever they had to. and we leave Iran get away scot-free. I mean, here it's not hard to work out who's the agent behind this. It's Iranian spies trying to kill Iranian journalists. Guess who's behind this? What is it going to be? Alaska? No, I don't think so. It's just mad, just mad. The fact that we respond to such attacks in our own soil with this level of stupidity, and it's the Henry Kissinger school of appeasement, and that's the problem. People who work in the foreign field, for foreign affairs or whatever, they all take this doctrine from Kissinger of appeasement. It's a continuous exchange, trading of favor, and nobody addresses the right problem.
Yeah. And all of the excuses that are used to prevent the right problem. Oh, it's going to cause economic problems for different countries if we attack a region or whatever. I mean, in the case of this story, this ought to be shocking. This really ought to be a shocking story, and yet I'm not remotely surprised. And it's because of, as Marco outlined there, the precedent of what Russia has done on our own soil. And to be honest, as far as I see it, even among our own population here in the UK, of barely a raised eyebrow at such an occurrence. I just didn't see the outrage I would have expected from what Russia did. It quickly died away as a story, and so this one coming out now occupies the same territory, really. I think when it comes to the response of politicians to it, you've got David Cameron, who speaks out of one corner of his mouth to condemn this sort of thing, and out of the other corner of his mouth is already saying that the Palestinian people deserve a political horizon, and they should be beginning to consider how a Palestinian state ought to be implemented when the right time comes, which is something he's been saying publicly. I mean, whether that's truly the government line, whether that's talking about the future in Gaza or not, is kind of irrelevant. You're offering two contrary positions here, one of which totally undermines the other.
Yes. I guess we should say for people, these two journalists who were reportedly the subject of this assassination order, one of them is called Seema Sabet, and the other one is called Farhad Farazad. I definitely didn't have that written down. And so these are these two people who have been threatened, and the sanctions are they aren't even against Iran as a totality, which is kind of what Marco was saying. They're against two Iranian officials, who are the people who have supposedly ordered the plot. And so their assets have been frozen. I don't know if they're allowed to travel. It's these kind of things which have happened in response. And this is the kind of thing which the Foreign Office, which is being led by David Cameron at the moment, who Richard mentioned, they're saying they will not tolerate any of this such thing on our soil. They're being very tough about it. Yet, of course, Marco, you mentioned the Salisbury poisonings in 2018 happened and prompted very little response from us, and that was with Russia. And of course, there was the same thing happening before that was it 2006 with Litvinenko, 2004? So actually, autocratic regimes around the world have been able to do this thing in Britain repeatedly for quite a while and have gotten away with it. And I would have liked to have seen these kind of sanctions taken out against Russia back in 2018, although they didn't. I don't think we even cut off diplomatic relations. So actually, this is kind of the bare minimum that's being done. And I guess what frustrates me about this is that people act as if this is, we're being really tough. We're doing a lot about this. And it's not as if I long for war. It's not like I long for my country to be in a state of war. But every time we don't, basically why this story dovetails well with our previous stories, it gets to the nature of appeasement again. The more we do nothing about this, or the more that we take insufficient action, the more this is going to be able to keep happening. And the more we weaken ourselves through our own inaction or through our own weakness. I've got a bit more to say, but John, I'll bring you in. Did you have any thoughts on this story?
Yeah, ridiculous. I haven't heard anything about it other than what you sent me. And yeah, it just comes down to the fact that the UK couldn't even go after Russia for actually killing UK citizens. Why the hell are they going to go after Iran for just simply planning to? I don't see it happening. And not only did the Russian attempt to kill a couple people, but it put a lot of people at risk of potential death. The nerve agent spread just by touching it, I guess, and it was very, very lucky that it didn't get to a wider populace. But I guess the Western idea is until you kill us, we can't really do much about it. So
yeah, so with the Salisbury poisonings in 2018, the two initial people who were targeted, one of whom used to be a Russian intelligence official, they somehow very, very luckily managed to survive. But the police officer who also touched it almost died. And then I think it was actually 6 months down the line. So the way the nerve agent had been administered was, I think it was put under their door handle. It had been carried in like a perfume bottle. And then when these guys, after they'd sprayed it, they basically threw it in a bin. And then 6 months down the line, presumably somehow this bin hadn't been cleared. A guy who I think was maybe a drug addict or semi-homeless, in a very sad story, really, was looking for a present for his girlfriend, and picked up this perfume bottle and thought, amazing, I'll give it to her. And so then he had touched it, but she also sprayed it directly onto her skin, and they both then subsequently died. Their names escape me, but I remember the man's name was Charlie, if I'm getting that right. And it was the same.
The woman died, I think.
Oh, really? Okay, well, maybe I'm wrong there. And that we saw a very similar response in Parliament afterwards, where Theresa May, who was as much as she seems probably like one-to-one, she might be a nice person, was, I think, a dreadful prime minister. She stood up in Parliament, said, look, we know what nerve agent it was. We know that Russia has a lot of this. We know the two agents who did it. We know their names. We know their faces. We know they were there. We know they flew just into the country for this, blah, blah, blah. And yet what was actually done about it? Basically nothing. There was a lot of rhetoric exchanged, in response to which Russia said that the UK shouldn't threaten a nuclear power. So threatening that if we do anything about it, it will all be killed in a nuclear strike. And yet people then view a military response to this as being impractical. Now, I understand that the UK military is very weak. There's no way we're going to take on Russia or probably even Iran by ourselves. But I think the basic point is it goes to the same nature as the other story about appeasement. There has to be something substantive done about this to stop it happening, or it will continue to happen into the future. And so with the story with these journalists, I guess it's a similar thing to the Hitler analogy with when Turkey killed a journalist. I think, was it Turkey? No, it wasn't Turkey. It was Saudi Arabia, wasn't it? In a Turkish embassy, am I getting that wrong?
Khashoggi, yeah.
Khashoggi, there we go. When they killed Khashoggi a few years ago, I think everyone saw that and thought, goodness, how terrible. We should stand up and do something about this, although precious little was done about it. And yet here we have another case, which is actually slipping under the radar, perhaps because we're becoming desensitized to these kind of things. So there we go. So we're in the final few minutes. Any final comments on either of the stories we've spoken about today, guys?
Well, the thing that links them is the fear of escalating things on one side, which leads to such capitulation or inaction, which allows them to happen again. And also, I think it's understanding how what sanctions are in the first place. And putting a sanction on a handful of individuals is the easiest thing for any group of individuals to get around. All those individuals, no matter who they are, know other individuals who can buy or sell whatever they need, particularly if they've got a state backing them because they're essentially spies or whatever in the first place. So that's exceptionally weak. You shouldn't be trading at all with places like Iraq. But of course, the other kind of sanctions is tariffs. And things like that, which you shouldn't have with your own friends and allies. So you need to make the distinction quite clear. So you've got free trade with all of those countries where you do share the same values, and you have sanctions, enforced sanctions, or the encouragement not to trade with your enemies, essentially, to ensure that your values and your future is preserved.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of look at events by their essential. What's happening here? You have, as I said earlier on, an uncivilized group of people who want to destroy civilization. So you can't strip it down to a more basic description than this. And so you have to pick a side. Which side are you on? Are you for civilization freedom, or are you towards being a slave and living in the caves?
John, any final comments on anything?
Just wanted to make the statement that the West has been paying for de-escalation between itself and Iran for decades now, and it's only getting worse. So how people can see this is working, I do not get it. Iran is simply trying to run the clock out till it gets a nuclear weapon, because not necessarily that they're going to use it, but then they know no one will ever attack them. And so they can really pump these proxies and pretend that they're not directly involved.
Absolutely. So we're in the final few minutes, so we'll wrap up. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. If you do appreciate our work here, the stories that we're covering, as some people said, Kathleen said in her super chat, you can always sign up to be a member of the Ayn Rand Centre UK at various levels, and you get various awards based on that. You can also sign up to be a channel member, which you'll get some rewards for as well. That helps keeps the lights on, helps keep Razzie traveling around the world, and helps us doing the work we're doing. So please sign up if you can. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for joining me. And everyone will be back tomorrow on the reality show at 6 p.m.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.